Hello, this is Black Country Blokes chewing the fat.
Listen.
I've been hearing a lot lately about men don't talk, but in my experience, men do talk, just people aren't listening. So it's going to be me and a group of blokes discussing our struggles and victories through life. Warning, there may be some bad language, so apologies to all the mums, especially my own. Let's get going.
Listen.
Having you gang. Me, Dylan, Lee Cadman, sorry about that little noise then, Craig Pinches, and we're joined today by Dr Singh. Dr Singh is a surgeon at Leicester Royal Infirmary. Now, I got to know Dr Singh through coming to boxing shows, and he does the medicals. Lovely man. And he's one of the doctors who actually believes in amateur boxing, but that's a podcast for another day. What I've asked him to come on is to talk about how all this coronavirus is affecting our doctors, nurses, cleaners, the people we're clapping for every Thursday. Even though we're clapping for them, sometimes we're not stopping and asking, how are you? So, Doc, thank you very much for coming on, mate.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you for inviting me, Kevin. Hey, everybody.
And so, what's it like on the front ground at the moment, mate? How are people's spirits?
So at the minute, we're kind of relieved. I mean, we didn't really feel the surge, certainly not in Leicester or Coventry. I know that there was a few hotspots actually towards Birmingham, but that fearful surge that happened in London, we didn't feel the effects of it as much. But that certainly doesn't diminish. There was a lot of deaths in a very, very short period of time. So it's a weird feeling. It's almost the aftermath. You know, when a tornado's just hit you, you've panicked, you screamed, and now the tornado's left, and you're just trying to pick up pieces from around you. That's where we are at the minute, mate.
As you just said, like sometimes it's when you're in the heat of battle, you feel it, aren't you? But afterwards, when you start thinking, well, I could have died then, or someone I loved could have died, and how do I move forwards from that?
You're absolutely right. It's a strange feeling, because when you're in the NHS, irrespective of where you are in the NHS, everybody's working their nuts off. Trust me, there isn't a single person. Those days of playing golf in mid-afternoon or long gone. So everybody's working their nuts off, and you're right. You don't stop and think. You don't have that moment to gather your thoughts. And unfortunately, like with most things in life, when you don't take time out to reflect on things, it will catch up with you. And at some point, you know, it strikes you, and you'll be forced to confront it.
Has there been anyone like from the NHS? Like, have they been reaching out to the nurses, or you know, when you've had a bad day and you've lost more people than you want, or you've lost a colleague, are they offering counselling and other things?
So during the period, and when I'm saying the period, I'm talking about from mid-March. I mean, we all knew back in February that, you know, essentially shit has hit the fan. We were already getting the reports from South Korea. So these are accurate reports. So nobody was believing within the scientific community what was coming out of China. It was way too late. The WHO was staying a bit very, very strim on things. And so we were relying on information from South Korea, Singapore, and then Italy blew up. And that's literally, we had staff members whose family, we're talking brothers, sisters, mums, were in Italy within the hospital service working at the time. So this was first-hand information we were getting back in February. And so over that period, when really everything got changed and the whole world turned upside down for us, essentially, there was nothing. There was literally no coordinated effort in terms of addressing what was going on. And to be fair, I suppose you can't blame them, really. We were just caught in a huge tidal wave, and we really didn't know how we were going to cope with patients. We had beds full of patients that needed to be in hospital, but we knew that there's going to be a whole new cohort, a whole new population of patients coming in that are going to need those beds and unfortunately a bit more than the patients that are already there. And we just didn't have the space or the capacity at that time. That was the real dilemma. So yeah, we struggled at the beginning. Right now, Kevin, what we got now is I'm getting emails. So this is a great thing. So literally, I can say 4 days ago, I got my first email from NHS Mental Wellbeing, and they've invited you to contact them if you feel that you need to. But again, it's one of those things that we laugh as clinicians, because you have to put your hand up. You have to put your head above the parapet and say, yeah, I need help, to be able to engage and get the help. But the whole premise of mental health is that you don't want to be that person. You're already trying to, shell in. You're already trying to mask your inner self, and you're trying to put on a face for everybody. And I suspect that there's many listeners that are listening, sitting there right now, that can relate to this. For years before they've even confronted that they've had issues, they were basically living a lie, almost as an imposter, putting on that brave face and carrying on. And it's tragic, really, because the NHS, it's got very, very young staff. I was in intensive care for 6 weeks, helping there, and the staff that were coming through, let's just say, for instance, nurses. These were nurses that have never ever worked within the NHS before. They've literally just finished their degrees at universities. We're talking about young men and women who are probably about 21 years old, and their first job is in intensive care, mate. And to see that level of mortality around them, I don't know how they're going to struggle, because they're not equipped with the tools that I've got. I've been in this job for nearly 15 years, so I've developed coping mechanisms. Just as we all have that are listening right now, we've all developed coping mechanisms. But these young people, I really, really feared for them, to be honest.
Sonny, I can really relate to that. My daughter's disabled, and I've been in intensive care so many times with her now, I've lost count. And
wow.
Even being in that environment makes it stressful, let alone having to do what they do in there. No doubt, probably not up to the not enough staff in there with the amount of people at that time as well. Because I know intensive care, usually there's one nurse to the bed, isn't there?
Absolutely, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that wasn't quite the case. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but there was that much of an influx of people. There wasn't the staff there to do it, so it must have been very, very daunting. And I think that there's going to be a lot of people who do need mental health help coming out of that.
Yeah, Lee, it's so strange. So you've seen the inside of intensive care, and you've seen that basically you could walk into any hospital within the NHS. And, there might be financial cuts here and there, but one place that they explicitly make sure it's the best of the best, creme de la creme, is intensive care. Syringes and drugs might be running out in other places, but in intensive care, they would never ever tolerate things like that. And over this COVID period, if you imagine that a large intensive care unit in this country is considered to be between 18 and 22 beds, we expanded intensive care to nearly 46 beds. That meant that we were taking over other wards. So any patients that were there were essentially having to be moved either to other wards, there was no room, or to home. And then we were then trying to get all the equipment in to make those into intensive care beds. So it was absolute bedlam at the beginning. And imagine if you've never ever worked in intensive care, and your first job, you're told, is that you're going to go into intensive care where they all got coronavirus, and then you're going to be caring for the most critically ill patients right now. There's nobody else iller than these people, and there's nobody else that you're going to be able to save their life. And then you're told that there is no rota, there's no timetable, You just stay there and you keep going and going. And you remind yourself that this shit, guys, I've got to get home. You know, there was at the beginning there just wasn't the coordination there, and God bless all those people that work in intensive care. Those guys just worked such ridiculous hours. It was mayhem. I mean, I was literally there from an eye point of view, so I wasn't really looking after the lungs or the heart and things like that. But the people that were having to do that, they couldn't leave the bedside. It would change dramatically within a few minutes, the state of the patient. And so, I personally know of people that were there, doing 14-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts, going home. First thing they do is collapse, then get up, shower, and come straight back in again because they knew they had left a couple of patients that they need to really look after. So.
That's beautiful, Doc. What was that interference then, Lee? Do we know? Was it just the internet? Lee,
you're on mute, mate.
Sorry, Kev, it's me pausing your mic. Unfortunately, we're getting interference from your mic, so I have to pause you every now and again.
All right, then, fine, yeah. Am I talking now?
Yeah, you're fine. You're fine as long as you can talk, but when anyone else is talking, I have to pause you.
Okay. So, Doc, because we had someone who's an ex-squaddy come on the other day, Stuart Bratt, and he was saying, like, he was in combat, and he was saying he can imagine these nurses and doctors, as you just described, these first timers are coming to see this battlefield of death and pain. They're going to be coming away with it from post-traumatic stress syndrome.
I don't have any experience of PTSD, but from what I've learned, I'd be very, very surprised if a majority of them aren't struggling with it right now. It was so there's a strange thing amongst the clinicians is that we have a lot of dark humor, right? And it's basically, lads, what we do. Somebody gets hit by a car and you go into the hospital to see him and you'll make a joke, right? It would just be a funny thing, be like, blimey, I knew you needed your eyes tested, but Jesus Christ, you couldn't see the van coming, that kind of thing. It's I think that the way that we were handling things as the senior clinicians, we were using a lot of dark humor, but there were moments that even that couldn't cover up things that we were seeing. It was Kev, if you imagine, and I've never seen this before, you hear these romantic type stories where there's a really elderly gentleman in a bed on a ward and his wife also gets admitted and the nurses put them together so they can hold hands and things. Well, here on intensive care, imagine there was families, we're talking about husbands and wives and their kids all in the same bloody ward, and they're all being ventilated. And because they're in a coma, none of them know about the fate of the other members of their families. And I can't comprehend what it must be like to wake up and be told, the gravity of the situation, what's happened. It really, really, I don't think the human brain is designed for things like this. I really don't.
Lads, is there anything, Aaron, is there anything you'd like to ask Dr. Singh about this?
Just trying to unmute myself. No, I think I'm seconding everything obviously everyone's saying here. I've got family that work for the NHS as well, Frontline. My mum was a nurse pretty much most of life. My dad's still working. My wife's a pharmacist. So I feel everything that they're going through, and I second everything that you say, that when they come home, it's not just exhaustion from like the physical aspect, it's like mentally taxing on them, and that's horrible. The only thing I was going to ask you, but obviously this might be out of your remit, I suppose, given your expertise isn't so much on the mental health aspect, was and I'm being a bit of a pessimist here, sorry, is what's your views in terms of like second waves, and is there anything that maybe you could just recommend or that maybe we could mitigate something happening later on. Because for me, I'm still overly cautious. I'm still really not kind of throwing myself out there, because I can't have that on my conscience that me going out 1 or 2 weeks earlier could essentially affect somebody else. So that's probably all I'd ask, really.
You know, it's a really, really good question. Okay, and the other thing that I'd like to say is, it Aaron, your name?
Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron. The other thing that I'd like to say is that it's amazing that you're sitting there and your very first thought is, I might be implicating, or I might jeopardize somebody else. You know, I think that attitude is, I think it's quite unique to being British. That our very first instinct is always, well, look, I didn't even consider myself. All I'm worried about is bringing it home and giving it to somebody else. Or, you know, so look, mate, people like you are few and far between in the world. Honestly, you should hold your head very high for having those types of principles. In terms of second waves, so coronavirus itself, it's a bit like the flu virus, right? It's been around for thousands of years, we suspect. It just happens to be that when a particular mutation happens in any of these types of viruses, they either become really, really weak and disappear, a bit like influenza does. So each year it comes around, it's really aggressive, but it's mutating at such a rate itself. Its DNA is so unstable that every time it tries to make offspring, the offspring are a little bit weaker than the predecessors. Right. And that's how influenza dies out usually. The thing with this particular coronavirus is that, one, we don't think it's mutating, right? It might be, but it's so soon that we just haven't seen any mutations in it. And certainly if it has mutated, it hasn't caused it to get any weaker yet. In fact, the worry is that, are the mutations adapting to become stronger? So any previous coronavirus infection that's happened, you have little outbreaks, nothing like this though, right? So get COVID out your head. Let's just say that there was a flu virus and it happened to be by corona. It's like a rattle of a tail. Yeah. The first wave is really major. And then the next wave that happens is usually, they suspect it's between 3 to 6 months later. And it's a smaller ripple. And then it gets smaller and smaller in a cycle like that. But this isn't behaving like those ones. That's the problem. The velocity and the fact that it's not mutating as quickly, we're worried that it's not going to behave like all the other types of infections that we've seen with corona. And then the other really important thing you've asked is something that's, on the lips of everybody is what can we do? And the small and short of it is, which is very apt, which is why I think this podcast is amazing, is people that have mental health issues, usually hand in hand, they have a lower immunity. Okay. Yeah. This is something that we found throughout the world, that when somebody is depressed, they generally are more susceptible to having infections, or they don't heal as quickly as somebody that is not depressed. Okay. So this means that all of a sudden, you've got a huge population of people that may not be sleeping very well. They may be having, they may have illicit drug addiction, and they may have anxiety, and that's causing them to have lots and lots of, periods of where they're not eating as well. There's so many knock-on things. Sunlight, if you're staying indoors because you just literally, you cannot drag yourself out of the bed because you're just feeling so crap that day. There's no motivation within you to get out of bed. So you're not getting the sunlight that you need. And the sunlight is so important for vitamin D and just to boost your hormones. And we're talking about the happy hormones here, right? The neurotransmitters within the brain. It's a strange thing. People in Iceland, they don't have as high a depression rate. And we suspect it's because when the sun does come out, all of these nutters in Iceland, they just run out and they just push each other out into the sun, and they try to maximize it. But we don't do that, right? Because we take it for granted the sun's out, and when it doesn't come out, we think, sod it, we stay in. So there's lots of things, but generally what I'd say is that the big game here is up here, mate. It's
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm not telling everybody to be on top of their game and become super strength humans, but you've really got to think that, hold on a second, do I really need to lock into my usual habit? And it's very hard. It's easy for me to say sitting here, right? But you've got to try and break that habit of what's causing you to not really get the maximum immunity level. And so that means eating well, certainly sleeping well, and definitely getting some sunlight onto you, even in the window.
Thank you. I think that's really useful advice. Thank you.
Is there any questions you'd like to ask the doc?
Me, mate. With me, it's not so much a question. I'll be the first to admit, like, when all this has come about, and even of lately, I've sort of been, I'm like the opposite to Aaron. So I've not sort of disrespected the social distancing measures and done what I want to. But I've always felt in myself that nothing's true that I'm hearing, because I've not heard it from someone like yourself. And what's made me feel like today that I've sort of took it a little bit more casual, would the word be? I don't know. I've not been scared into anything. I've not felt scared. But after hearing you today, and you saying that from what you've seen firsthand, it sort of stopped me in my tracks, sitting right here and thinking, just because you're a pessimist when it comes to media and social media and whatever else, it doesn't mean to say that it's not as serious. Because I've never sort of questioned the severity of it. I just never believe what I hear and people I hear on social media, because I always think that there are a lot of bandwagon jumpers, there are a lot of scaremongers and this and the other. And I'll be the first. I'm far from an ignorant person, but I've sort of sat here listening to you now and thought maybe I have been a little bit not ignorant, and I've not been callous in my behaviour, but you've sort of put it into perspective how serious it is, from what you've seen firsthand.
Those are, again, very excellent points you've raised. I think nowadays with all the Kim Kardashian and all of that stuff going on, we tend to take a lot of what we read with a pinch of salt. And remember, I've portrayed to you guys what I've seen in intensive care. So I'm like the tip of the iceberg, the worst part right at the top that's going to melt first kind of thing. They're the patients that I've seen. So I don't want to paint a really atrocious picture of what's happened, but I've seen the worst of it. Just like the gentleman you had on last week, Kevin, that you were saying, the squaddy, who's, that poor fella, he's seen things that I don't think the human brain is ever supposed to see, and hence he's been brave enough to talk about these things and share these insights with all of us. I think that there's most people, when they get coronavirus, they will resolve, they will get better. But for some reason, this particular infection, it was getting really young, fit men and women to the point where they needed to get admitted into intensive care. And when I saw that, that's when it, exactly like you're saying, it struck me. I thought, oh shit, this is real. This isn't just something happening in China and Italy, and they're all just making it up, and it's just, there's obviously some ulterior political motive. I thought to myself, bloody hell. And there's, I know we're running short on time, but I wanted to just quickly share one other thing with you that and this stopped me in my tracks as well, this particular aspect of the story. So sorry, I've lost my train of thought there. It's probably because I don't want to talk about it, to be honest. Sorry, Kev, go ahead. let me see if I can regather my thoughts a second.
No, it's great, mate. And this is what we love, though, Dr. Singh. We love real people. As you know, we haven't sent you any questions over. We want it to be people talking generally from the heart.
Yeah, I and that's why I probably like the boxing fraternity so much, because you know, it's just the population that I see, they're just very, very honest people. I love that. That's it. I'm attracted to that type of environment tremendously. The one story that I wanted to share with you guys from intensive care was so Lee, if you recall, unfortunately, I'm bringing you into this just because you shared your stories when you were in intensive care with your daughter. You can imagine that you basically got to know the nurses and the clinicians to such a level that you were on first name terms, right? And you were, it was almost as though they were talking to you as much as they were to the patient. And this is the thing that hit the intensive care consultants so hard, was that all of a sudden, if you got admitted into intensive care, you had no family around you. The only contact that you'd have was on the end of a phone, and you'd have to ring the family member, find some time in the day. It'd probably be only once in the week you'd get a phone call as an update to what's happening to your loved one. And one consultant, she started crying, and this was a consultant of 15 years in intensive care. So, you know, a tough old nut, right, who's been making critical decisions for a majority of her life. And she broke down and started crying. It was about 1 o'clock in the morning. She had just come out of the hot zone. The hot zone is where you've got to have the full equipment on, like you're dressed in as an astronaut, essentially. And you've just come out, you're drenched in sweat, and you're exhausted because you're carrying all that weight. And she broke down in tears, and I happened to be there. And I was like, oh, you know, are you okay? And she said that I just feel so mechanical and robotic. 80% of my care was being able to talk to the loved ones and engage them in the decision making, you know, really embrace them. And, you know, because I couldn't talk to the patient because they're comatose, I'd be talking to the family, the daughters and the parents, and let them know that, you know, this is what we're thinking. What do you think? And that was stripped away. And she said that I feel like a robot in there. 80% of my care is now suddenly being shredded away, and I didn't realize that that's what made me a doctor. It wasn't the 20% of mechanical work that I was doing to save lives. And that really got in my psyche. I was mesmerized by what she said. I drove home and I couldn't stop thinking about what she had spoken. You know, that's a real trooper. I don't think there's going to be very few people in life that get that moment of epiphany where they suddenly realize that, shit, that's what made me. And she had that moment, albeit in the worst of circumstances.
In truth, I couldn't really imagine me not being able to be there and support my daughter at that time. And you're right, the nurses there, the doctors there, for the time you're in there, they're like a second family. They're not just there doing the job. They're also a shoulder to cry on, someone who you can talk to, who has some kind of understanding of what you're going through. And that goes for the other people in there. My daughter's 5, so we was on the children's intensive care ward, and there's other families around you as well who are all going through the same thing. So you kind of gain strength from everyone around you as well as the doctors. But they really do, the doctor nurses really do become part of your family, to the point we get invited to Christmas dues that they have on their ward still, and she hasn't been in intensive care in over a year now. You know, it's and the work they do is just fantastic. And the care and the take, it's unreal. We do have a question for you. Sorry,
please, yeah, go ahead.
Aaron, do you want to ask that question? Can you see that on the screen? It's from your wife.
Yeah, sure. So. Yeah, so I managed to persuade the wife to actually watch today. Bless her. She was just asking, actually, that so she's heard some news that's come out that apparently Black or Asian groups are potentially more likely to die from COVID. And she's just asking, have you seen anything that would maybe reaffirm that statement in the workplace yourself? Are there extra precautions maybe you'd advise Black and Asian groups, or is this just something that, again, has just come in the media and kind of just been retweeted about?
So, I mean, I was in Leicester, and Leicester's densely populated with Gujaratis. Okay, so that's like we're talking about mainly Indian population. You do have a small Bengali and Bangladeshi population, and about equal. I mean, I don't know. Don't quote me on this, but I think about equal mix of white and African heritage, black children and people. So when I was in there, I generally saw mainly men, very few women. And then of those men, they were nearly all of them were either black or brown. There was the very, very odd Caucasian person. Now, in my head at that time, I was trying to figure it out. It struck me as well. I was like,
yeah,
you know, it's full of blokes in here, and they all bloody look like me. So I was like, Jesus, what's going on here? And I put it in my head that, well, Leicester's made up of mainly Indian population, and hence, if someone's going to get ill, they're going to most likely be from an Indian family, and that's why they've ended up here. But then, as we started learning in April that actually other places around the country had got the same type of mix that I was seeing in Leicester, and they necessarily didn't have that many ethnic population within the community around them. That's when this whole thing about, you know, the BME community being more susceptible was really taken seriously. Right. So I have to stress to the listeners that we were all learning while we were there as well. We have never seen anything like this. It's unprecedented. So we're still trying to get our head around it. And there's a lot of theories out there. The first one was vitamin D, that, you know, generally we thought that because of our genetics, we generally require more vitamin D than most, and we just don't get it in this country. But then when we looked at populations where there was sun and they were ethnic, it just didn't make sense because they were just getting it just as bad as well. Right, so that was out. Then there was a little bit of a theory about TB and people that have had the BCG vaccine. Now, any of our white listeners out there, they'll know that every one of their mates at school that was from a black or Asian background had this horrible scar on their arm, and I've still got mine there. And you know, I'm sure that you guys could all have a look on you and be like, yeah, shit, you're right, dog. So what that was that there was a higher rate of TB being infected because people from those particular communities, they'd have family members coming over from overseas where there's a higher rate of TB and infecting the people nearest to them. And so it was just thought that the best thing to do is just vaccinate the highest risk people. And they thought, shit, do you reckon the vaccine's got something to do with being more susceptible to coronavirus? But that hasn't really worked out. They've tried to investigate that, and they've said that, well, that doesn't work out either. So we're still kind of at a loss as to why. What we do know, and these are facts, is that Black and Asians, they tend to have a higher rate of diabetes. Yeah. So hence, it means that you're higher risk for anything. It just happens to be corona this time. Black and Asians tend to be of a lower socio-economic group, and therefore when they're living in a house, it's not just, you know, their brother and sister in the house. You got bloody grandchildren, grandparents, uncles, aunts. You got people visiting that you don't even know who the hell they are, but they're living in the house as well because they're just trying to you're just trying to help them out, and they're thinking that maybe that has an impact as well, and that's fact. So, you know, these are the kind of things that we're trying to struggle and work out why. But certainly this doesn't mean that you're immune if you're white. because I've seen it with my own eyes. Blonde hair, blue-eyed, the stereotypical white person, and they've, really, really, I don't want to say the actual words, but they've met their demise from this infection. So this isn't just a black thing at all. And the other thing, Lee, is I think we were off air when we were just starting to the podcast. The whole political aspect behind this is there's people that are exploiting this whole fact so badly at the minute, and it's making me furious, to be honest with you, me and my friends within the hospital, because all of a sudden now you've got those that want to use this as a motive to now expound other types of ideas and other things that they feel a bit pissed off about within community, but to use this as a weapon to try and get across your views, that just doesn't make sense to me at all. It's sickening.
Thanks for that. Thank you.
No worries.
Is anyone ask Doctor why he's here? Well, from the bottom of my heart, Doc, thank you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you, I'm going to advertise the next show, but while I'm advertising it, if you ever think, if there's any quotes or sayings that's not only just got you through this stuff, but it's helped you get through life. So while you're having a think, I'm going to advertise Thursday's show. On Thursday, we've got a very good friend of mine. He's boxed me for 18 years. He's a coach at the club, Gary Tomlinson, a.k.a. Gaz Southpaw. Now, he's done his boxing, and now he's going into photography and modelling. And when I asked him to come on the show, he says, but Kev, I haven't really had that many real life-changing badness. I went, but you're a bloke and you have had these down days. And I think that can relate sometimes more to people than some of the super stories, because we're all people. We all have our ups, we all have our downs. Some days we're bulletproof, and other days we could crumble if a feather landed on our shoulders. So remember, as Doc said, as Lee said, all the gang said, we've all got these problems. Let's reach out and take care of each other by phone call, or never allowed to pop around and stand at the bottom of the garden and check up on each other. So, Doc, have you got any quotes or sayings?
I've got one, mate, and it certainly is something I've said to my kids over this last period as well, and I'd love to share it with everybody. It basically goes that you can read all the philosophies in the world, you can read the highest books of religion in the world, and you can be taught by the greatest masters in the world, but even then, the highest of all the highest, the best religion of all is love. And that's really what I'd like everybody to share.
Beautiful. Well, once again, thank you very much. So we're going live again on Thursday at 6 p.m, either on this Facebook or on YouTube, whichever way you're finding us. And if ever you do miss an episode, you can always go back to our YouTube channel, which is free, and listen to all of our guests. So until Thursday, gang, take care of yourselves and each other. Ta-ra a bit.
Listen.
And that's a wrap for another show. But if there are any comments or messages that you would like us to read out for our next podcast, please be in touch. There are also lots of different organisations at the bottom of this page, and hopefully they can help you or someone you care about. Please share this to spread the word. Until we talk next time, ta-ra a bit.
Listen.